So today's podcast is titled Money as a Language. We use pieces of paper to communicate what we value. If we give a group of people a limited number of pieces of paper each, and we put it on a table different types of goods and services, such as food, drug, airplane tickets, or whatnot, and we let people buy and trade freely, after a while we'll get a sense of what people value. So perhaps we might find that older people value medicine more than young people who value beer, let's say. If there's a person within that group that has access to infinite number of pieces of paper, that would distort the language such that it would make it impossible to know what people actually value. In fact, I would make the argument that society's frustrations stem from the fact that there exists a difference between the values we perceive and the value given by these pieces of paper. So in 2009, the central banks, which in our example represent the person who has access to unlimited number of pieces of paper, decided that housing prices were too low and it had the ultimate power to change the prices of real estate. Now, if the prices of real estate is different than what we, the people, think it should be, then there is a gap between what we actually value and what the pieces of paper say that things are valued. So I live in Israel, and here too housing prices have risen significantly in the past 10 years. Many people believe that this represents the increase in value of houses in Israel. I, on the other hand, would say that people confuse prices for values. The best way I can explain this distinction to an Israeli goes something like this. Imagine that in 2009, Israel had signed a peace treaty with the Arab world and the Palestinians, a real treaty where there is real trade and commerce. Also, imagine that companies such as Google and Facebook grow right here in Israel. And finally, imagine that instead of 3 million tourists a year, like the small island of Palma de Mallorca, we too would have had 16 million tourists visiting Israel every year. The question is, what would have happened to real estate prices since 2009 up until today? Certainly rise. Now imagine we did not have any peace treaty. Companies are sold long before they get to the size of Facebook and Google, and that we still have 3 million tourists a year and no more. But unlike the 1990s and prior, a person does not need a cosigner to cosign for a mortgage loan. Furthermore, one can put a 20 or 10% down payment instead of the 50% it used to be. And the interest rates are historically low, such that a 1,000,000 shekel mortgage loan that would have cost 10,000 shekels a month would cost 4,000 shekels a month. Now what would have happened to real estate prices? Also rise. In both cases, the cost of housing rose. Yet, it should be obvious that these two scenarios describe a completely different reality. In the first, people flocked to Israel, whether in the form of workers from abroad, visiting tourists, and of course, the transfer of people due to commerce within neighboring states. While in the second, more pieces of paper were printed. The distinction is between prices versus values. From my experience, some of you listeners are still confused. You might say, who cares? In both cases, the cost of housing rose, so what difference does that make? What you're missing is the fact that while the cost would have ended up the same, in the first case, one can open a falafel stand in front of their property and make 10,000 shekels a day selling food to the millions of people walking the busy streets. And well-paying jobs are abundant. So while the cost of housing is high, so is one's income. Simply put, prices and values are aligned. Hopefully, this solidifies my argument as to how central banks, who have unlimited access to pieces of paper, can distort our language of value. Here is an anecdote. Two young fish are swimming in a lake when an older fish comes across them and says, "Nice water today, boys." The two young fish nod and continue on swimming. A few moments later, one of the young fish turns to his companion and asks, "What the hell is water?" This anecdote is profound in the sense that the fish did not distinguish the water. The fish might see a shark, a rock, or a plant, completely oblivious to the fact that there is water between it and the object. Much like how we humans did not consider air to be something as we do today, which is the composition of oxygen and nitrogen and so on. It was just empty space between us, yet it had very significant influence on our lives, very significant. Yet people did not notice it, just like how people do not notice money. In fact, most people did not take the time to consider what money is. I found that many people think that today's money is somehow backed by gold. It is not. And it has not been so since Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971. He has done so by simply refusing to convert the Federal Reserve note, a piece of paper, to gold at a predetermined price of 35 pieces of paper per ounce, a parity that lasted between 1945 and 1971. Now that gold backing is gone, we have people within our society, we call them central bankers, who can distort our language without bounds. You may understand it or you may not, but trust me, you experience it. While many people in Venezuela, Argentina, Hong Kong, and France cannot place their finger on it, and they cannot describe the monetary system that distorts their reality, they do experience it without a doubt. So it will be impossible for me to conclude without mentioning cryptos, because they are a way for us to communicate value without using a third party, without anyone being able to distort our language, and it is valuable.